we're going to try something a little bit risky, which is to have someone who is on the front line of sustainable business talk to us from where she is in Bahrain today. The United Nations Global Compact had their Making Global Goals Local Business, as we heard earlier today from Lisa Kingo, the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact, an event in Delhi, and I had a chance to meet Kanika, who spoke for the Global Compact, and I thought it would be very interesting for you to hear from a young woman who is an entrepreneur who says that she will not do business if it isn't in an ethical way. She was chosen last year to be one of the World Economic Forum's young business leaders, along with someone that we've been hearing a lot about in France, Emmanuel Macron, just to tell you the kind of company that she keeps. So without much delay, let's see if we can make this work.
No, you can't put toilets, this 55-acre plot of land at the airport for your construction workers. You can't do it. Women? Well, you can't hire women. We don't have toilets for women. What are you talking about? Why have you put this entire global mini little village on the airport site, on the 5 acres of land that we've set up for you? I'm sorry, you have to remove this. You have to remove your canteen. You're providing food, you're providing water, you're providing this 3 times a day to your workers at this Delhi International Airport site. And all IBM's workers, all ABB's workers, they're all coming to us and striking because they're saying they want to work for you. I'm sorry, everyone doesn't have this infrastructure. Please find rental accommodation. We really can't support you here. This was the conversation that I had in 2010 with senior members of management of the Delhi International Airport. When I was trying to convince them, and I'd set up a little small village on 5 acres of barren land that they provided to me for my operations, to make the operations efficient so that we could complete the Delhi International Airport in record time. It was the world's largest PPP. I was told to remove all this and move to rental accommodation where the workers didn't have water and were only provided water to have a bath from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. I explained, I said, you know what, the land mafia come to the rental accommodation. That's why we've created air-conditioned container housing for them. It looks amazing, and they have areas to rest during the day. Why can't we use this land? It's against the law. I said, but the land mafia come, and they disturb our workers. How are we going to finish this airport on time? It's against the law. Tell the police about the land mafia, but the police want to bribe. What do we do? This was my conversation. And a month later, after the SDGs were developed in 2015, I thought, let me use another argument. I used the same argument with a recent development that we're doing at the airport, asked for women, asked for accommodation on site, on similar barren land that was provided. This time I said, we're satisfying SDG 1, 2, 5, 6, and 11. And you know what? Prime Minister Modi is campaigning for toilets. So this is the perfect excuse to set all this up. Can we do it? The answer was still no. This is 5 years later, after the SDG, 7 years later, after the SDGs were still developed. June 16th, 2016, almost a year ago, this nation mourned the horrendous murder of fellow IGL Joe Cox, who was singled out for attack as a passionate defender of EU and immigration. This was one of many horrendous deaths that we've encountered and have stirred the world. London hasn't had a break since. Terrorism is on the rise, and the city lives in fear. This is after 2015. The SDGs were developed, and we're hoping that in 7 days, 7 billion people around the world would not only know about them, but would actually implement them. The SDGs were developed with the purpose to create a more prosperous, sustainable, equitable planet. But on the contrary, we've ended up with a humanitarian crisis. You can see that. No, not the refugee crisis. No, not zero poverty. and therefore the poverty crisis. No, not ISIS, but it's the human race. That is our humanitarian crisis. Whether it's convincing businesses to put aside the bottom line, as I was trying to do, or encourage governments to look at a holistic approach towards progress, rather than them defining their economies by the number of skyscrapers that form their skyline, or the amount of money that they put aside for weapons of mass destruction, the current framework, I'm sorry, it's just not working. I know this isn't the sort of opening that you expected on Inspiration Day, especially during our closing session. But we've got to face reality. While the intent of the SDGs is noble, there's clearly a gap in arriving upon the utopian life that we're envisioning. When there is a lack, we need to be on a path of constant change and improvement. We need to innovate for betterment of society. Somehow, this deterioration in society and in the societal framework, in the SDG framework in itself, in the inability to implement the SDGs so far, is inspiration in itself. Well, I guess it's sort of a homeopathic approach. In my opinion, the disease itself will create a disruption and mobilize a global population towards a cure itself. No, don't worry. We don't have to wait till World War III. The self-destruction that we have created through an impending stagflation, breakdown of society and relationships, and our voting patterns is enough to catalyze the change that we desire. Jo Cox was one individual that sacrificed her life to mobilize millions all over the world. Similarly, we have examples of government taking a stand in solidarity with individuals, stepping aside and not creating an authoritarian approach that we're seeing in many populations in the West. But just very recently, Jordan experienced issues with climate change, forest fires, and you saw King Abdullah standing there with his army and with the people moving shrubs. You must check out that YouTube video. It's amazing and most inspirational. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but we've got to do something about it. Personally, my experience above, where I'd constantly been facing roadblocks against the development of SDGs, against doing my part towards SDGs, even though I'm working on a very large scale, and I couldn't move forward. Well, that inspired me towards our new concept, a new concept called the Spiritual Index, an index to encourage governments to look at economic prosperity and growth in a new fashion, doing away with their common standards of GDP, where we look at the economic gaps and the gaps in the SDGs in a spiritual manner, in a manner that pertains to sustainable happiness. We have a happiness index, but it doesn't point towards sustainability. We need something that's sustainable, not just something that's aimed towards 2030. We need something where big business is rewarded, small business is rewarded, and we work together as integrated silos. If we're better people, we can come up with better solutions. So our concept, how do we demonstrate that the spiritual index works? Well, we're working towards a mini village in an area where there's very high levels of poverty, but we use the spiritual index to actually progress society, where we would use mobile housing, self-sustainable, using green methods of development, but also encouraging a society that is truly happy. Automation isn't the solution to everything. We haven't succeeded for millions of years, so how are we going to fix this gap only in 12 years? Do we only have to think about 2030? No. This is a daily obligation, and this needs to be met from the bottom up. We need to have such conferences with individuals, with your drivers, with your cooks, with your labor, sitting in this very room to figure out how to implement the goal. So let's get inspired to reinvent. Let's reinvent the noble framework. And remember that man has the capacity to foresee and forestall. Let's return to our source, our true source of spiritual, sustainable happiness. to create the utopia that we were born to live. Thank you.